Hey guys, welcome back to another video. My name is Jaya and I talk all things books here on this channel. If you're new here, thank you for being here. If you're returning, it's so exciting to have you. Today I'm going to be doing one of my all-time favorite videos, which is the reading wrap-up. Now I read all things on this channel, but it's primarily fiction. Every once in a while we'll get a little bit of nonfiction, memoirs, that type of thing. But 80% of the time, you're probably going to see it being bookish related content that is on fiction. That being said, this month is usually my thriller month, but I did get through quite a few books, and 3 of the books that I read did happen to be more fantasy focused. 4 or 5 of them actually were like a mix of fantasy, like historical fiction fantasy, as well as thriller mystery vibes. So it kind of fit the vibes all together. And then one of the books was actually a different type of literature altogether, but that was the book that was selected by my secondary book club that I attend. One of the books that I did have on my TBR for this month was God of the Woods. It actually won awards on Book of the Month. It was selected as the Book of the Year for this year. And I have this now beautiful copy that also has like the purple painted edges and all this fun stuff. The thing is, when I had posted online Facebook the poll for what book my book club wanted to read for this upcoming month of April, the book that was selected actually happened to be The God of the Woods. So I did end up discontinuing reading it. I had started it a few days ago, and then I was like, you know what, actually I'm just going to save this and read this later on in April so I remember the storyline for when we actually have our book club discussion and when I actually have to sit down and write questions for it, because I do actually typically tend to head that Zoom discussion for that group. So for that reason, that book has been nicked off. That being said, altogether, we still have 17 books to go through. So without further ado, let's jump into it. I'm going to start first and foremost with the book club book for Paper and Glam. Paper and Glam is a wonderful little book club that's led by a woman named Lisa Marie Landreth and her team of amazing type A awesome women. We tend to read books once a month and discuss them. Every once in a while, we'll throw in an additional book as well, just to see if people are interested in reading it and chit-chatting about it as well. This month, there are 2 books on the list, and I do not plan on reading one of them, which is, it's a self-help type style of book, and that's not really my vibe. The other book is Bunny by Mona Awad, and that is a typically I've seen it under dark academia, but I'm not really 100% sure what that book would actually fall under. It is about a woman who is surrounded by a clique of girls and starts losing her identity as she starts to fit in with these people and that type of vibe. It is happening in an academic setting. I don't know for sure if there's a murder or not, but that story is called Bunny. Anyways, coming back to the point. For this past month, we read a book called The Fifth Avenue Story Society by Rachel Hauck. I absolutely thought this book was adorable. It's very, very sunshine in a book vibes. It's basically about a group of 6 people who are going through some hardships in their life, and they happen to be pulled together into a society where they can essentially lean on each other and grow from each other, even though they're all extremely different people. So it was a very interesting read. I am very happy to say that I gave it a solid 3.5 stars. And I actually rounded it up to 4 stars on Goodreads. I just love the fact that it left me with a warm feeling. I loved the overall message, the positivity of the book. So I do think it was definitely fun to read. And I would definitely recommend it if that is kind of the style of book that you may be interested in or looking for. If you are wondering why I seem slightly distracted right now, it's because I'm trying to find the other book of the 17 books that I want to show you guys so that you can see the novella that I read as well this month. I just realized that other book that I was searching for that I mentioned was a novella is actually part of a series. So I will pull that book up actually when we're talking about that series. But this is probably going to be a longer video. So wherever you are, definitely pick up your cup of tea, your hot water, your cocoa, your wine, whatever it is that is your beverage of choice, because we're going to be talking for a minute. The first book that I want to talk about is The Boyfriend. This was actually on my TBR for March, and it was also my first Frieda McFadden. Now, when they say that she makes her books very twisty, turvy, and like confusing to a certain extent, where you don't really know exactly what's going to happen, things kind of come left wind, that is 100% true about this book. When they also say that she's kind of a long-winded author, I did also feel like that was true. However, this being my first book with her, I did actually enjoy the story quite a bit. Do I see myself picking up a bunch of her other books? I'm not 100% sure. This book was a solid 3-star read for me. I was continually guessing who the actual murderer was up until the end of the book. The plot premises of this book is basically that there is a woman who is single, she's had a miserable dating life, and she's just looking to find love. I mean, didn't we all go through that phase? Or aren't we all at some point in that phase of our life? Well, this poor woman is also being reminded by her mother on a constant barrage that, women are still having children at 40. So, she has plenty of opportunities, and she's over here in her 30s, like freaking out. She finally goes on a date that seems like it's going to be a great date with a doctor. Her friend in the building is also dating someone. Her other friend is also dating someone. They're all finally in a place where they're in relationships, and like they're all kind of being, a little secretive about the inner depths and workings of their relationship. In the case of two of the main characters, Miss Bonnie, as well as our main character, Sydney, in this book, they both do not actually share the name of the person that they're dating. And then Gretchen is been with the building maintenance guy forever, although everyone thinks he's kind of weird. They're all a little shy about sharing their information. The reason I'm giving you all this background is like when she first goes out on her date, it's an absolute atrocious date. The man is a complete and total creep. He almost acts like a stalker. He's not at all what his dating profile says. And then in swoops in this man who basically saves her. Eventually they fall into a pattern of being rescued, and he eventually asks her out. They go out on a couple dates, and then things start seeming a little funny. Also, newsflash, her best friend, one of them, ends up dead. There's stories of multiple women who are getting murdered around the city, and she starts wondering, who am I really dating, and is the actual serial killer? So that's kind of what the plot line of the story is. I didn't ruin anything here because it does actually say all of this on the back of the book to a certain extent, but I would say the final ending was interesting. You also get a little bit of a flashback in this story from the perspective of Tom, who is the main male lead character, and his history and his past, as well as the story of him and his first love, and kind of some of the interesting dialogue that happens in his head as well. It was overall a well-written book. Like I said, it does move relatively fast in the first, I would say, 20%, and then in the last, 40%. It's just the in-between that was a little slow, but 3-star read. Next up here, I loved this book. So one of my favorite authors is actually Stuart Turton. He had actually written 2 other books before this. The first one being The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which is an absolute favorite of mine. Think science fiction meets Groundhog Day meets murder mystery, and you kind of got yourself a plot line there. That one was absolutely epic, and I know there was a lot of mixed reviews on that book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I do think it's sometimes better to have a piece of paper and a pen with that book, so you can jot down some notes as you go, but that one was really interesting. And then The Devil in the Dark Waters is also an excellent book that he had written as well, also kind of sci-fi-y, also thriller murder mystery. So then he gave us this book. This book is basically talking about a situation in which humanity has been eradicated by a fog that has basically come in and destroyed all of humanity when humanity was at its absolute peak in technological innovation. 3 scientists, however, and a group of villagers are living safely in an island that is protected from the fog. They have an AI system that helps bond all the villagers and the scientists together, and the scientists are doing whatever they can to keep humanity alive. These villagers are very, very calm. They're very, very peaceful. They live as if it's the olden days. They're all tilling for their own things, and they're doing all the work in the fields and all this good stuff. And it's a little mix of sci-fi and science. Basically, throughout the course of this book, what ends up happening is one of these beloved scientists ends up dead, and then the protections against the fog start to slowly fade, and it's up to the villagers to solve the murder mystery before the fog rolls in and kills them all. They have 24 hours to save all of humanity. I loved this book. Solid 4.5 stars for me. I thought this book was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I loved all the twists and turns, and I just love how engaged I was with this book. I also absolutely adore the beauty of this book, and I love the painted edges. I'm so thankful to have this in a special edition copy, and I do see myself always reading Stuart Turton's books because they're just so good and they're so unique and they're so intriguing. This I felt like was the perfect blend of sci-fi, murder mystery, and human psychology into a book. So if that sounds like it's your vibe, definitely try picking him up sometime. Next up, we have that series that I was talking about. So I decided to finally sink my teeth into this series because this author happens to be one of my all-time favorite authors. I am not going to go into too much depth with this series because I did do a full series review for this set of books that is actually on my channel already. In case you missed that video, I will definitely link it at the end of this video in case you wanted to hop over and watch it. But it is none other than Stalking Jack the Ripper series, which is by Kerri Maniscalco. So in this book, you have a young woman who is basically in, the early hundreds, and she is stalking Jack the Ripper. So I want to say like 1900s, right? She is basically like trying to figure out who this evil murderer is. She's also a pillar of society and a society woman, so she still cares about like looking nice and dressing nice, but relationships and boys are not at the forefront of her mind. Her uncle happens to be one of the foremost, most renowned scientists in all of London and also medical examiner. So he looks at all the corpses and does the autopsies. He has a bunch of students, but his most brilliant students happen to be Miss Audrey Rose, who is his niece, as well as Mr. Thomas Cresswell, who is our main male lead character in this series. This book was great because it definitely talked about a woman who felt like she was repressed in the traditional common sense of the word of what women should be, and instead it focuses on this idea that she could be both. She could still succeed in society while being one of the most brilliant scientific minds of her time and one of the forefront thinking people in the field of medicine. So I loved this book for multiple different reasons. I loved the gothic energy of it. I loved the thriller version of this thriller aspect of this book, with all of them trying to figure out who Jack the Ripper is and how they can stop the killings that are going on that a lot of the police are not taking seriously because it's just a bunch of prostitutes at the end of the day to them in a male-ridden society. I love the struggles that she feels both emotionally as well as physically, trying to survive in a man's world while still making her own way and finding her independence as a woman. And I also just love the banter that was done in these books. This is a very closed romance for sure, closed door romance for sure. The fourth book has a little bit of a hint of spice, but it doesn't go into too much detail, like 0.25 chili for the fourth book. But it is scandalous for them to even have a kiss in this book, right? Like, just let alone being alone in the same room without a chaperone. So that kind of vibe. But I absolutely love the banter. I ate up the romance. I ate up the story. I ate up the setting. I loved it. This book was a solid 3.5 stars for me. I absolutely adore this book. The only reason it was a 3.5 stars because it's setting the stage and you're still learning the characters, so it does move a little bit slowly. Then we have Prince Dracula. So after they solve the mystery in the first book, they, being Thomas Cresswell and Audrey, are recommended to go to a elite school for students that are interested in medicine. It happens to be in Romania, where the circulations of Prince Dracula are present. In this book, the murder mystery is, of course, about corpses turning up without blood, whether or not there's a real vampire, what's going on, what's the science behind it. This one was also great if you're intrigued by secret societies, if you like murder mysteries, if you like a woman who is, a kick-ass character who's also, not conforming to society's norms, but also at the same time a woman in her own right, while still being having a medically brilliant mind. This is the series for you. I'm just saying. This was great. I loved this book. This one, however, was probably my least favorite of all four. just because this one felt the slowest to me. This is a thick, thick book. So this one I ended up giving a solid 3 stars. And then this book here, which is the 3rd book in the series, Escape from Houdini, is where things started getting really good for me. In this book, Audrey Rose, Thomas Cresswell, and her uncle have been requested to come to New York for some opportunities. So they're on the boat crossing the ocean to get to New York when murders start happening on the boat. And of course, it's all in the same time period and world as the magical Houdini. This was an absolutely wonderful book. I loved the intrigue. I loved the storyline. I loved the murders. I loved the setting. I loved the magic. I loved the banter. I loved the introduction of another male character that Miss Audrey Rose might have her head turned by. It was just so cute. I loved this book. This was a solid 4.5-star book for me. I adored this book. Then in between those books, that one and the 5th book, we have Becoming the Dark Prince, which is a novella. This book is about Thomas Cresswell's viewpoint of what's going on in escaping from Houdini and what happens at the conclusion of the book and how he's feeling towards a certain someone and his interpretation of the events. I absolutely loved that. I loved getting his perspective and I loved seeing his way of thinking. And I definitely think that Kerri Maniscalco did a beautiful job of fleshing out his character. And then last but not least, we have Capturing the Devil. This is in relation to The Devil in the White City, which was a very true tragic turn of events. The thing I like about all of these books is it is based on real life history that has occurred and then just been taken and shaped and molded into a different context for all of us. The book in this case is obviously about what's going on in Chicago during the time of the White City. Revolutions are taking place, globalization is taking place, and a murderer is rampantly running loose, killing a bunch of women and incinerating them in the White City. And so she and Thomas Cresswell are on the job to try to figure out what's going on. Again, that particular story from our history is something that stuck with me. The Devil in the White City was probably one of my favorite books that I've ever read in terms of combining a story of intrigue and advancement and technology along with this crazy serial killer that's also been in that realm at the same time. Like the fact that the two tandem stories are being told was a very, very fun read for me, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that historical recollection of what happened in Chicago. So this was very reminiscent of that experience for me too, which heightened this book. So the book that I'm talking about, again, I believe it's by Eric Larson and it's The Devil in the White City. That book was absolutely excellent, based on true events and true facts, but told in story format. And then this is kind of a hats off to that situation. It's obviously not a true story per se, but it is pulling from historical events in this book with The Devil in the White City. Again, loved this book. You also get, a lot of drama in terms of Thomas and Audrey Rose and their engagement and all that kind of stuff. You get a lot of everything in this book. And I just thought it was the perfect conclusion to the series. This was also a 4-star read for me. So overall, this series was definitely a 4-star. And if you want more details and thoughts that I have about this series, definitely go check out that video about the review of Stalking Jack the Ripper. Next up, I had The Night We Lost Him by Laura Dave. Now, this is my second book by this author. The first book that I read by her is The Lies He Told Us, or The Lies He Told Me. That one was absolutely excellent. It was based in San Francisco and in Texas, and so that just really hit home for me too, because those were the two states that I was jumping in between. And so having vibes of San Francisco and Austin, Texas was just absolutely great for me. This book is not quite that. It's a little bit different than that. It is about a man who has died, and he has children from multiple different relationships that he's had in the past. And while he's always had a relationship with his children, his marriages have often fallen apart. And while he is close to his children, he hasn't shared all the pieces of him. So they're kind of estranged. The children aren't too close. But basically a stepbrother and a half brother and half sister end up on a journey to try to figure out how this man died. And through that process, they unravel an entire history. You get perspectives from the past as well as from the present in this book. It was a fun read. It was very, very emotional journey. I really enjoyed reading the different characters' developments and the relationships between the siblings. and the things that come out of the woodworks with this book, but I didn't find it as much fun as the first book that I read by Laura Dave. But I do think that she is an author that I'm going to continue to keep my eye on. This was a solid 3-star read for me. Then we have another intriguing one. So Liane Moriarty is one of my favorite authors as well when it comes to mystery thrillers. For those of you who may not recognize her name, she did write the books that the shows were based on, Big Little Lies, as well as 9 Perfect Strangers. She is a well-known Australian author, and most of her books take place in Australia. This particular book is about a bunch of passengers who are on a plane together when a woman decides to basically have a psychotic break and walks down the aisle predicting each person's death, how they die, and what age they're going to die at. Then when they get off the plane, mysterious things start happening, and some of the characters that she said were going to die at a certain time and a certain age, they actually do end up dying at that time. You also get the story from the woman who predicts the deaths as well. Her mother was a clairvoyant, and she was told that she has some of these like abilities as well, even though she's never really capitalized on it. She also has a very sad history herself. But basically we're following the storyline of all of these multiple characters and this question of how much is fate actually there and how much of it is up to free will. Also a question of how does our outlook on life change if we're told certain things. It was a very interesting book. It definitely made me think, and I did love kind of like the intrigue of the book and this will this happen, will this not happen type of vibe of this book. And it was the perfect energy for when I was traveling this past month, because when I was on a plane, it was the perfect setting for this book. I gave this book overall a 3-star. I think it was a fun read. I don't necessarily see myself revisiting it, but it was a very enjoyable read, and it definitely makes you think, which was great. Next up, I have A Talent for Murder. This was also a very interesting book. This is by Peter Swanson. It is basically a story about a woman who thinks she has a love curse put on her and that every man that she dates ends up being a bad egg. She had something similar happen to her in college, and now the man that she's married to, she's noticed every single time he travels for a job and he comes back, there is dead bodies in every city that he visits, and it becomes a question mark of, is he a serial killer? It's an interesting read. I did find this book a little far-fetched. I did think that it was a little over the top and unbelievable for me, but overall I did enjoy the story and the energy of this book. This was a solid 3-star read for me. Very similar to Frieda's The Boyfriend in terms of the setup of the story, but very, very different stories, just so you know as well. Then we have Kill for Me, Kill for You. This one was also really interesting. This is a book by Steve Cavanagh. This is basically about some women who end up meeting in a support group for people who have lost loved ones in their lives. And while they're there, these 2 women start talking, and they realize that they want certain men in their life dead who are the main cause of significant grief to them because they happen to commit murders of, loved ones, and then the case was never closed. So in order to protect themselves, but also enact revenge, they agree to kill for each other. Now, amongst this, you also get the story of a third character. Her name is Ruth. She is, a perfectly wonderful woman living with her husband when all of a sudden a home invasion occurs and she gets attacked. We kind of get the story from her perspective as well as from her husband's perspective as well. And I will say this book was a little bit slow, and the wind up of how these characters all intertwine is a little slow as well. But once you get to, the second half of the book, or I would even say once you get 3/4 of the way into this book just flies. And I did think the ending was absolutely incredible, and I thought it was so much fun. Especially with what ends up happening with one of the main characters at the end of this book. So I definitely enjoyed this one. I gave this one a 3.75 stars, rounded up to a 4 stars on Goodreads. Would definitely recommend, and I can see why Book of the Month chose this book. Then I have The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. I recently read the only A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series by Miss Holly Jackson, and I really enjoyed them. I still have 5 Survive, which I have not read yet, which is a standalone novel. And then I noticed that this book had released a few months ago. And so when I saw this book like last year, I was like, yes, I want to add this to my collection and I'm definitely going to read it. And then I just was not in the mood for thrillers at that point in time. So I finally picked this up now. This is basically a story about a young girl. Her name is Belle. She goes, her actual name is Annabelle, but she goes by Belle. Her mother disappeared when she was 2 years old, and her father has been the one who is taking care of her. She's very close with her uncle and his wife, as well as their daughter as well. And her grandfather, unfortunately, is starting to develop a little bit of memory loss. He's now wheelchair bound. And in order to pay for his medical bills, the family decide that they're open to doing a podcast. And so a podcast crew comes by to basically form a documentary about the story of Rachel Price and how she went missing 16 years ago. Fast forward this book a little bit, and all of a sudden you see a woman who's traipsing along the side of the road and ends up showing up at their house claiming to be Rachel Price. Belle doesn't know who to believe. Belle doesn't know what's going on. Belle doesn't know what to expect. And this book is basically a twisty-turny book of her trying to put all of the clues together to figure out exactly who Rachel Price is and whether or not her story is telling the truth of where she was and what happened. The culmination of this book at the end, I think, is what makes it so great. This was definitely a book where I didn't necessarily see the ending coming until I was pretty close to the end. There were certain aspects of the book where I was like, okay, this makes sense. I kind of saw this coming. But there's other parts of this book that just completely threw me off guard. I do think that the ending was a little bit rushed, but overall this was a great read, and I did give this a solid 4-star. Listen for the Lie. Oh my gosh. So this is the book that I actually finished on March 31st. Started it on March 31st, finished it on March 31st. I absolutely loved this book. This book is basically about a woman who's believed to be the murderer of her best friend. She doesn't remember it happening. The police couldn't find enough evidence, so she was never taken into custody. And now there's a podcaster running around who's basically trying to pull up all the old skeletons of how Miss Savvy died. And Miss Lucy Chase, who is believed to be the murderer, is now being pulled back into the drama and is being forced to go back to her hometown in order to celebrate her grandmother's birthday. Little does she know that her grandmother is actually setting her up with this podcast guy in order for her to finally get some relief and have her name cleared, because it's someone coming in with a fresh perspective instead of just blaming her. I just felt like the characters in this book were very interesting. I think the storyline was very interesting. The personalities were very interesting. And the overall vibes of this book was absolutely perfect for what I was looking for. There was just enough amount of cringe, discomfort, definitely thriller, sitting on the edge of my seat vibes, especially particularly closer to the end. This was one of the few books that I've read that's a thriller where I didn't feel the need to look up the ending or have any spoilers told to me as the story was going on. I was 100% in for it and on the ride. I didn't need anyone to tell me whether or not my theories were correct. It was just such a fun read. So this Amy Tintera book was definitely a solid 4-star read for me as well. And I would recommend this to anyone who's looking for a good whodunit kind of storyline and going along with a unreliable narrator as she's trying to put together the pieces of what happened that night and who actually murdered her best friend. Then we have another series. Now, I'll also put this series review at the end of this video, so you guys can go check that out as well if you're interested. But I'm talking about none other than Fourth Wing. So Onyx Storm actually released earlier this month, or was it earlier last month? It might have been earlier last month. And I have been waiting to sink my teeth into that book. However, I decided with my book club that we were going to be reading it for the month of March. So in order to prepare for book club and to be ready for Onyx Storm, I decided to reread the entire series. So first and foremost, I did read Fourth Wing. 5-star read. Loved this book. Then I read Iron Flame. Solid read. Second time around, it was a lot better, and the romance was less irritating in this one, so I could actually focus on the plots and the little crumbs that are left behind in this book, knowing how it ended. So this was upgraded to a 4.5 stars for me. And then we had Onyx Storm. Now, I know a lot of people found this book very slow and they found it very boring, but let's be honest, guys. It's a 5-series book. This book was bound to give us more information and leave us hungering for more and also leaving us on a cliffhanger yet again without knowing what's going to happen, but with theories out the wazoo. I believe personally that in the fourth book, we'll finally get a little bit more closure. However, I also think we're going to see a lot of death. And then I think the fifth book is the final battle when everything happens. And that's when you're going to get your final happy ending. So I do think the fourth and fifth book are going to be a lot more intense than this book was. But I do think this was more of a filler book with information being presented to the readers in order to get them prepared for the next few books in the series. If you're new to fantasy, I can see why Fourth Wing has been a little bit slow if you're not used to it. I think if you are a diehard fantasy reader and you love all things fantasy, this is a great series. If you're okay with smut, this also has a lot of smut in it as well. There is quite a bit of some red chilies in there in terms of the relationship between Xaden and Violet. This book series basically is following the story of a young woman named Violet who is forced to go into the Writer's Quadrant. The Writer's Quadrant is the place where people go in order to train to protect their area, which is a land called Navarre, as well as their ability to prove themselves to be capable, strong enough, and intellectual enough to bond dragons. They do get magical powers through their dragons and all these other things. Of course, needless to say, things are not as they seem. And at the end of this book, Violet is awoken to some very, very important and scary truths. There's also the added fact that she happens to be the daughter of the general who is basically in charge of protecting all of Navarre. And her romantic interest happens to be a true enemies to lovers situation. So yeah, we got all that going on in this book. Then in Iron Flame, the things started to move a little bit faster. You realize more about what's going on in terms of the rebellion, as well as what's going on outside of Navarre. You get a lot more details that are expressed to you. You have a lot more drama in terms of the relationship. Just keep in mind when you go into this book that it is teenage romance and it can get very irritating, but I promise it gets better. Then in Onyx Storm, now you have everyone kind of caught up with the reality of what's going on, whether they want to be or not. You have people who have been on opposite sides of a war forever having to come together for the real war that's taking place. You have a lot of crazy research that's going on in order to try to understand cures for certain things, as well as what it means that a specific type of creature has now been brought into the equation that has not been present for years on end. You get to learn more about the continent as a whole. You get to see places where there are magic, places where there's not magic. In the second book, you have griffins as well as dragons. In this book, you have griffins and dragons and non-magic wielders and all kinds of crazy things. I still think this was a really interesting book, and I loved learning more about the world that they live in and feeling like I was in each of these places that they explored with all the characters. Overall, all three of these books, I absolutely adore them. I honestly feel like this series is going to be a 5-star series for me. Just because of the fact that Onyx Storm is a little bit of a filler book, I do feel like I gave it a 4 stars, but that's a very, very strong 4 stars, just so everybody knows. So that altogether brings me to the conclusion of this video. I read a total of 17 books this month. I will list the titles down below in the description in case you're interested in checking any of these books out. The series will be listed as just a series so that you can just look up the series by the author and the first book name. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here with me. If you're new and you liked this content, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell. I put out videos every Wednesday and Sunday on bookish related content, and I would love to have you here back with me. That being said, wherever you are, whether it's morning, evening, or night, please have a wonderful rest of your day, and I wish you a very happy reading journey ahead. Bye, guys.